Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
My name is Tessa Langford, and I once believed that love, if stretched far enough, could outlast anything, even time, even shame, even silence. But I was wrong. The day my mother died, I found a letter beneath a stack of utility bills, not in the locked drawer, not in the fireproof safe, just folded in thirds between an old electric bill and a pamphlet from the hospice. It was addressed to me in her handwriting, the kind I hadn't seen in years, not since her tremors started. I stared at the envelope for so long, I forgot to breathe. When I finally opened it, my fingers were shaking. It wasn't long, just 4 paragraphs, barely a page, but the words inside burned like a wound reopening. She had written it nearly 6 months before her death, and she had never meant for me to find it. If you're reading this, Tess, I didn't have the courage to say it aloud. That was the first line. Not, I love you, not, I'm proud, but a confession of failure. The second line was worse. I never told you the truth about your father. Not really. I froze. The name alone was a phantom. My biological father, a story told in pieces, always half sanitized. He wasn't ready for a child. He loved you in his own way. He had demons. But no one ever told me what those demons were. In the letter, she wrote about the day she left him. Not the sugar-coated version I'd grown up with, but the real one. He had pushed her down a flight of stairs. She was 6 months pregnant. The baby had almost died. That baby was me. I remember sitting in the kitchen, sunlight bleeding across the linoleum, reading that line over and over until the words lost meaning. She wrote that she ran, that she changed her name, that she never filed charges because she knew he'd fight for custody and win. He was a Kessler, old money, iron reputation. And she? She was just a scholarship girl who worked night shifts at the pharmacy. So she vanished. She gave up everything so he'd never find us. And she kept it all inside for 28 years. The final paragraph broke me. You deserved the truth, but I was too scared. I thought hiding it would protect you. Now I know that silence isn't the same as safety. I'm sorry for everything. I love you more than my fear. I cried until my throat hurt. Because here it was, the moment of clarity I'd begged for my whole life, and she was gone. No follow-up conversation, no answers to my questions, just paper and ink, and the echo of a woman who had always spoken in half-truths. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the apartment we'd shared during her final months, every room full of grief that hadn't yet settled. Her slipper still sat by the door. Her tea mug, chipped on the rim, was still in the sink. Everything was untouched. I opened drawers I hadn't dared open before. In her nightstand, I found a manila folder labeled Emergency Contacts. Inside, tucked between insurance forms and hospice instructions, was a name I didn't recognize, Margot Edison. Next to it, a phone number, a Chicago area code. Below that, Kessler Holdings Legal Counsel. My pulse quickened. Why would my mother have contact with someone from his company? Was it recent? Was she preparing for something? Or had he found her even after all these years? I sat on the floor, folder in my lap, heart pounding against my ribs. I had lived my entire life believing he was a ghost, a name without a face, a distant storm that never quite reached the coastline of my life. Now, now he was real. Now I had a name, a path, a doorway I wasn't sure I was ready to open. The next morning, I called the number. It rang once, twice, then a voice, firm, polished, and unmistakably expensive. Margot Edison. I hesitated. Hi, my name is Tessa Langford, and I think you might have known my mother, Marianne Langford. Silence. Then a breath. Tessa, yes. I was wondering when you'd call. Her voice held no surprise, only something colder, heavier, like she'd been preparing for this. I don't understand, I said. No, but you will. Are you in Evanston? Yes. Good. Then we should meet. There's something you need to see. And someone. Someone. I knew who she meant. Martin Kessler. The man whose blood ran through mine. The man my mother had feared for nearly 30 decades. The man who, until that moment, I wasn't even sure was still alive. Now, now I would come face to face with him, and I had no idea whether I was walking into a reunion or a reckoning. I took the train into the city the next morning. It rained the whole way in, the kind of thin, silvery rain that doesn't soak you but still finds its way into your collar and behind your ears. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Not that there was anyone to tell. My mother was gone. My job let me take a leave after the funeral. My landlord avoided eye contact whenever I passed him in the hallway. And my phone had been silent for days except for a few condolence texts that didn't require replies. So it was just me, and the letter, and the woman on the other end of that clipped, guarded voice. Margot Edison had instructed me to meet her at 10 a.m. in the lobby of the Kessler Global Center. Just saying the name aloud gave me chills. It sounded like the kind of place that swallowed people whole. The train hissed into the station a few blocks away, and I walked the rest of the way under my umbrella, dodging puddles and business people moving in tight, precise diagonals. Everyone in this part of Chicago moved like they had somewhere more important to be. When I turned the corner and saw the tower, I stopped walking. Glass from top to bottom, sleek, symmetrical, heartless. It loomed against the overcast sky like it had been carved out of ice. The doorman gave me a once-over as I stepped inside, his eyes flicking to the water clinging to my coat and my thrifted shoes. But I didn't stop at the desk. I simply said, "I'm here for Margot." He nodded. They knew. They were expecting me. Margot met me in the executive lounge, an understated room full of leather, filtered light, and corporate quiet. She was tall, with steel-colored hair cut into a bob sharp enough to draw blood. Her heels were modest, her blazer uncreased. Everything about her suggested she belonged here. I, on the other hand, felt like an intruder, in my mother's cardigan and a dress I hadn't worn since grad school. She looked like her, she said, offering me a seat. Marianne. The name landed like a stone. You knew her? For a time, Margot said. She was remarkable and very afraid. I swallowed. Afraid of what? Her gaze didn't waver. Of him. Of course she meant Martin. The man who had shaped my mother's entire adult life from a distance, the man who pushed her down a staircase, the man whose name was never spoken above a whisper. I don't know what I'm doing here. Yes, you do, she replied. You want answers. You want to see what your mother was trying to protect you from. She stood. And then softly, he's upstairs. I don't know how I moved. I just know I followed her. Through 2 security doors, into a private elevator. Up. Past the noise and the chaos and the people who thought they were important. Past the names on the donor wall and the photographs of board members shaking hands in sepia tones. past the things I thought I wanted to know, until the elevator dinged softly and the doors opened. The top floor was silent. No cubicles, no receptionist, just a stretch of polished marble, a pair of walnut double doors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked down over the city like a god surveying a chessboard. Margot didn't knock. She opened the doors and stepped aside. "He's expecting you." My heart was beating too loud to think. I stepped through, and there he was. Martin Kessler, older than I expected, grayer, still tall, still intact. He was sitting at a wide desk with nothing on it but a single silver pen and a glass of water. The kind of man who doesn't need to clutter his kingdom with proof. He said, "Tessa," standing. His voice was smooth, effortless. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I couldn't speak. He came closer, slowly. "I see your mother in you, that same fire in your eyes." "Don't," I said. Just one word, and it cracked the glass around us. He gestured to a seat. I didn't move. "Why am I here?" I asked. "To talk," he said. "To see if there's room for something more. A future. An understanding." "You beat her," I said, my voice steady now. "She was 6 months pregnant. You could have killed us both." His jaw tightened for the first time. "That was a long time ago." She never forgot. "I did what I thought was necessary at the time." I laughed, hollow. "She thought hiding from you was the only way to keep me safe." "And yet," he said, stepping closer again, "here you are." I flinched. He noticed. "Your mother was difficult, idealistic. She didn't understand what it takes to build something that lasts." "You mean power? Fear? Control? Legacy," he said. And in that moment I saw it. Not a father, not a man who regretted what he'd done, just a builder protecting his empire. And I realized, he didn't want me here for closure. He wanted to reclaim me. "Whatever you think this is, I'm not part of it. You are my daughter." "No," I said, my hand on the knob. "I'm my mother's." And I left, without looking back. I don't remember the elevator ride down, just the pressure in my ears and the way my knees refused to lock. I must have passed people, receptionists, interns, a security guard who barely glanced at me, but it felt like I was moving through glass, untouchable, unseen. Outside, the city breathed its usual noise, cars honking, pigeons flapping, voices rising and falling like static. But I couldn't hear any of it clearly. My heart was louder. What had just happened? He hadn't hit me. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even denied what he did. And that somehow made it worse. Back at the apartment, I sat on the couch with the lights off, my coat still on, Echo purring softly at my side. Yes, Echo. My mother's cat. Now mine. She had started following me around more in the last few days, like she could smell the shift in the air. Cats know when the story is changing. They're better historians than we are. I finally took off my shoes, set them by the radiator, and stared at the unopened mail on the table. At the top of the stack was a thick envelope marked with a Kessler Holdings logo. I hadn't seen it that morning. Had it arrived while I was gone? Had he timed it? I tore it open without thinking. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, formal. Tessa Langford. In light of recent events and the clarity brought forth by your mother's passing, we would like to begin the process of recognizing your inclusion in the Kessler Family Trust. As your biological father's only living heir, and with your mother having never pursued legal claims to the contrary, you are entitled to a significant portion of the estate, including but not limited to Class A shares in Kessler Holdings. We propose a meeting with our legal representatives to initiate the transfer. Sincerely, Margot Edison, Vice President, Legal Affairs, Kessler Holdings. My skin went cold. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a contract disguised as one. They weren't welcoming me into a family. They were binding me to a legacy. I spent the next several hours Googling terms I'd never cared to understand before. Class A shares, dynastic trust, quiet succession. What I found made my stomach twist. Kessler Holdings wasn't just an investment firm, it was a financial ecosystem. Real estate, defense contracting, international logistics, even biotech. The family trust was a sealed loop, carefully shielded behind shell companies and donor-advised funds. And every time I found a name connected to Martin, I also found whispers, allegations, payouts, silence. Always silence. Around 2 a.m., I pulled out the manila envelope from the emergency contacts folder again. On the back of one of the hospice forms, in my mother's fading handwriting, she had written, "If you ever need the truth, go to Marion." That was all. No last name, no address, no explanation. But she underlined the name twice. Marion. I typed it into the search bar. Nothing. I added Kessler. Still nothing. Then I added Marion Langford. A few clicks later, I found something. A news article from 1993, local paper. An op-ed by a Marion DaCosta, titled, "Who Holds the Rich Accountable?" The byline read, "Marion DaCosta, former senior accountant, Kessler Holdings." My heart nearly stopped. I clicked the article. The image was pixelated, but she looked familiar. Not from memory, from photos. Old photos my mother had kept in a shoebox, labeled Detroit. This woman had been part of her life once, and then disappeared, just like everything else tied to that man. The next morning, I booked a ticket to Detroit. One way. I didn't pack much, just a backpack, a USB drive, and the original letter from my mother. I left the envelope from Kessler Holdings on the kitchen table, alongside a note that simply said, "Not this way." Detroit in March still felt like winter, refusing to let go. The wind off the river had teeth. Empty lots were soggy with thawed snow and gravel, and boarded-up convenience stores leaned like old ghosts waiting to collapse. But the neighborhoods farther out told a different story. Quiet streets where little houses stood stubbornly proud, faded but not forgotten. The address I found was in one of those streets. A duplex with chipped blue siding, ivy choking the mailbox, and a screen door that clattered faintly in the breeze. A rusted garden angel guarded a square patch of frozen soil. I stared at the door for a long time. Not out of fear exactly, just a kind of weight. Like I knew everything would change once I rang the bell. The nameplate said, M. DaCosta. Underneath, a hand-scrawled note, "Use bell, not knock." So I did. The door opened halfway. A woman in her late 60s peered out at me with sharp gray eyes that softened a little when she saw my face. She didn't say hello, just, "You've got her eyes." Then the door opened the whole way. The house smelled like cardamom, pine cleaner, and something gently burning on a stovetop. She asked, "Tea?" I nodded. "Please." We sat in a narrow kitchen while sunlight bled through lace curtains. She moved with confidence, not grace, like a woman who had long ago decided she owed no one an apology for her space or the creaks in her knees. I studied her while she worked. Same woman from the 1993 article, but the lines in her face now carried decades of knowing things she couldn't say aloud. "You came all this way alone?" she asked, setting a mug in front of me. I didn't know who else to trust. She sat down opposite me, folding her hands. "Your mother didn't talk much about me, did she?" "She mentioned your name in a note. That's it." Marion nodded like she expected as much. Smart. She knew what silence was worth, even after all these years. What followed was not a story told in one go. It came in pieces, quiet truths strung together by pauses and memories. Marion DaCosta had once been senior internal auditor at Kessler Holdings. She joined thinking it was just another firm. Rich men moving money, corporate machines grinding along, but it was more. The deeper she went into the ledgers, the stranger the numbers became. Shell vendors, shadow entities with no registered employees. In one case, she traced a seven-figure transfer to a nonprofit in the Philippines that didn't exist. She brought it to her boss. He told her flatly to delete the file. The next week, she was restructured out. Severance came in the form of a thick NDA, a cold final paycheck, and a whisper, "Don't ask questions you don't want answered." I didn't sign, she said, sipping her tea. They thought I would, but I'd already copied the files. You kept evidence? She smiled without humor. You think women like us survive by being tidy? I leaned forward. Why didn't you go public? I tried. Went to a reporter. His editor buried it before it reached print. A week later, my car was broken into. Nothing taken, but the message was clear. What kind of message? The kind your mother got the day she left him. There it was. The name. Martin Kessler. She said it the way someone might say a diagnosis or a gun manufacturer. He didn't just want control. He wanted permanence. And your mother was the only thing he couldn't own. I told her what my mother's letter had said about the fall, the pregnancy, the escape. Marion closed her eyes for a long moment. She never told me about the stairs, she murmured, but I knew something happened. She called me the day after she ran, asked if I had cash. I wired her what I could and never heard from her again until last year. She said she didn't want to involve anyone else. She was protecting you. But now she's gone, I whispered, the ache clawing back to my throat. Marion reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black flash drive. Then take this, she said. It's not the whole truth, but it's enough. Enough to rattle the hinges. Later that night, I lay in a borrowed motel bed, watching headlights stutter across the ceiling. I'd plugged the flash drive into my laptop, but hadn't opened anything yet. I just stared at the folder labeled MH Archives. Inside, dozens of files. Invoices, transfers, scans of memos. Memos mentioning names I didn't recognize and projects I couldn't decipher. But scattered throughout were connections I couldn't ignore. Kessler Holdings wasn't just shady. It was strategic. Investments tied to private prisons, biotech firms specializing in compliance behavior, startups with ethics complaints that quietly disappeared after acquisition. And at the top of every chain, Martin Kessler. At 2:17 a.m., my inbox pinged. I almost didn't check it, but it was from a burner address. The subject line read, "You're digging too loud." Inside, a single sentence. "You're not the first daughter to come looking." I sat back, blood rushing through my ears. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing. I'd used VPNs, wiped my browser, stayed anonymous, but someone knew. Someone was watching. I didn't sleep. Not after the email. Not with those words digging under my skin like splinters. You're not the first daughter to come looking. It looped in my mind like a chant. Who else had come before me? What happened to her? Why was no one talking about it? I sat cross-legged on the motel bed, laptop open, the glow of the screen casting shadows against the wallpaper. Outside, Detroit slept. Inside, the past unraveled faster than I could track it. Every document Marion had stored, every file in the MH Archives folder read like a confession. Not just money laundering or tax evasion. It was bigger than that. Kessler Holdings had a pattern, a rhythm of silence. Fund, extract, collapse, buy the remains. They'd destroyed companies and built their empire on the wreckage. Publicly, they were saviors. Privately, they were scavengers. And now they were watching me. I opened the email again. The address was already disabled. No footer, no IP. Whoever sent it knew how to disappear. But I didn't want to disappear. Not anymore. Not after everything I'd uncovered. The truth was a burning thing in my hands now, and I couldn't keep holding it without getting scorched. So I did what I'd never done before. I reached out. I sent a message to a journalist I followed on an investigative forum, Lena Thorne, known for chasing down offshore shell structures and exposing corporate fraud. She had taken down a defense contractor once with nothing but flight records and a whistleblower's journal. My email was careful, precise. I'm in possession of documents that suggest a financial firm is leveraging capital to cover systemic abuse, fraud, and unethical human trials in the biotech sector. I have files. I have a source. I need to speak to you in person. I didn't expect a reply within the hour, but it came. Coffee. Tuesday, 8:30 a.m., Station House Cafe. Use the name Reed. Bring physical copies. I closed my laptop and started printing. I took a burner phone, left the motel behind, and moved into a guest house rented under a false name. I didn't tell Marion. I didn't tell anyone. Something inside me had shifted since Detroit. I was no longer looking for a father. I was preparing for a war. And in war, you don't broadcast your moves. 2 days later, I sat in the corner of a dim cafe, watching the door. When Lena walked in, I recognized her immediately. Not from photos, but from the way the room adjusted to her presence. People like her carry gravity. She ordered black coffee, sat across from me, and said, "Okay, Reed, show me." I passed her a folder. She flipped through without looking up. Page after page of wire transfers, contracts with redacted client names, nonprofit records that ended in P.O. boxes in Latvia. She moved fast, but not carelessly. When she reached a photo of Martin Kessler shaking hands with a pharma CEO currently under federal investigation, she finally looked at me. "You understand what this is, right?" she asked. "I do now. If I publish this, it won't just be a story. It'll be a detonation." "Good," I said. "Let it burn." That night, back at the guest house, I found another email waiting for me. Different address, no subject. One line. "We warned you. We're not in the business of forgiveness." No threats, just certainty. I shut off the Wi-Fi and packed everything. All the drives, the documents, Echo's carrier. We were leaving. Again. But then I paused because something wasn't right. I reopened the drive. In the folder marked Legacy Docs, I hadn't looked at everything. There was a file labeled Langford Settlement, 1989, PDF. I opened it, and everything fell into place. My mother had taken a settlement, not from Martin, but from Margot Edison. The agreement was clear. She would disappear. She would not speak. She would not seek custody, legal recourse, or recognition for her child. The child was me, and in return, she was paid $200,000 in monthly payments disguised as corporate dividends. My mother had taken blood money. Not to betray me, to protect me. She must have hidden it well. Never touched it, Never let it show? I had no idea growing up that she'd had anything but a string bean budget and coupons. But here it was. Proof of silence, of fear, of sacrifice. I fell back into the couch, heart thudding. My life, I realized, had been funded by the very empire I thought I was destroying. I didn't leave the guest house that night. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I just sat at the table with that settlement file open. My mother's handwriting curled around the margins, a woman's silent scream scribbled into the paper. For 28 years, I had lived inside her sacrifice. A life kept deliberately small, carefully invisible. Everything she denied herself, jobs, relationships, even joy, was part of the deal. Safety bought in installments. And now I knew the price. The question clawed its way through me. What would she want me to do now? Expose him? Burn the empire? Or protect the quiet world she gave her life to build? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I couldn't move forward pretending the silence hadn't cost us everything. The next morning, Lena called. Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "You've got company," she said. I froze. "What do you mean?" "3 separate firms have reached out to the paper since yesterday, all connected to Kessler. Some directly, some through cutouts. One offered a partnership opportunity to shut the story down. The others implied legal action. They're scared. They should be." She paused. Then, "Are you?" I looked at Echo, curled on the windowsill like nothing in the world could reach her. "I'm done being afraid," I said. That day, Lena published the story. Front page, banner headline. "The house that silence built, inside the Kessler machine." It wasn't just about the money. It was about the structure, the culture, the way fear was institutionalized, whistleblowers discredited, opponents outmaneuvered, victims paid and buried beneath polite press releases. It was about how you could build a global fortune not just with wealth, but with control. And at the center of it all was Martin Kessler. He didn't make a statement. Not at first. Instead, the machine kicked in, spokespersons, analysts, polite denials. But then came the subpoenas, the Senate inquiries, the corporate partners pulling back, the donation revocations. Within weeks, the board announced his medical leave. The stock dropped 17%, then 24%. Then headlines started using a new phrase, the Kessler collapse. A month later, I received a letter, handwritten, expensive paper, no return address, just the initials M.K. I sat with it for an hour before opening it. "Tessa, you've inherited more than you realize. Not just blood, but power. Use it wisely, or don't, but know this. Empires fall, but names last. M. No apology, no threat. Just arrogance dressed up as prophecy." I folded the letter in half and fed it to a match, watched it curl into ash in the sink. Then I booked a flight. I returned to Evanston in spring. The apartment felt different now, not haunted, but clean. My mother's slippers were still by the door, her mug chipped on the handle still on the shelf. But the silence had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was space. Room for something else. I found the box of journals she kept hidden in the closet. ones I'd never dared open before. Inside, pages of lists, memories, quotes scribbled in the margins. On the last page of the last book, in the faint, trembled scrawl of her final months, she had written, "Your name is not your father's. Your name is fire." I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. She had known. She had prepared me, not with weapons, but with memory, with truth, with her own refusal to be erased. Today, I run a foundation under her name, the Langford Trust. We fund protection for whistleblowers, ethical startups, and small, independent investigative journalism hubs. No big launch, no gala, just quiet, deliberate work. Exactly the kind she believed in. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my head, not the man himself, but the echo. That cold certainty, that legacy. But it doesn't haunt me now. It reminds me, because legacies don't belong to those who build them. They belong to those who name them. And I named mine after her.